It's amazing when resilience is added with just a bit of true north, self-awareness, that you see resilience is really appropriated, I think, in very healthy ways. But when people lack self-awareness and they're just white knuckling it, you can be tough and persevere, but you're just heading in the wrong direction.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Dr. Andy Garrett, who's going to share how to build radical resilience so you can thrive. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. While you're there, you can sign up for a monthly email where I share the best articles I read this month, let you know about upcoming episodes, and share a little wisdom. You can also listen to coaching calls under the Coaching Calls tab. I also share the most interesting articles I read every week on Facebook at facebook.com/Richer Soul. And there's also a Facebook group where you can ask questions and interact with other listeners. Today's quote is from Seneca. Putting things off is the biggest waste of life. It snatches away each day as it comes and denies us the present by promising us the future. The greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today. You're arranging what lies in fortune's control and abandoning what lies in yours. What are you looking at? To what goal are you straining? The whole future lies in uncertainty. Live immediately. Are you living for today or tomorrow? Do obstacles prevent you from the success you want? How do you overcome the obstacles you face in life? That's our topic today. Dr. Andy Garrett is back again. He was on in episode 200 to share how to grow and thrive. And today he's going to chat about radical resilience. We're both in the same mastermind group, and I love watching what he's doing to help people achieve their best. We dive deep into the realm of personal growth, core values, and the unwavering strength needed to thrive in today's challenging world. It's a bigger problem than you can imagine, and it's not getting any better. However, today we can make it better for you. And that's one small step forward. With a doctorate in clinical psychology and extensive studies in life coaching and consultancy, Dr. Andy Garrett is at the forefront of a revolutionary movement towards personal growth. He uniquely emphasizes a positive psychology approach that utilizes established individual or relational strengths rather than unscoring what may be pathological or dysfunctional. In blending this approach with cognitive behavioral psychology, existential psychology, and solution-focused strategies, he's empowered to provide a transformative brand of therapy. Let's meet Dr. Andy and learn how. Welcome back to Rich Your Soul, Andy Garrett. It's great to have you back again to join us today.
Yeah, excited to be here. Loved the first conversation that we've had. Had a few people reach out, had an amazing conversation with someone that I think is a big fan of yours, and excited to be here again, and love the people you've been having on the conversations. Some really great material.
It's kind of funny. I think people reach out to my guests more than they reach out to me. It's his life. So catch us up. What have you been doing the last couple of years?
I think there's just been a little bit that's happened in the last couple of years. So I think last time we spoke, I had put together a identity-based program, right? Really helping people to define their true north. If I remember right, so we put together a beta group that was set to launch on March 15th, 2019. So it was like the state of California, I think, literally went on like lockdown that day. So we had 20-something people set up for the beta group. A few people just said, hey, this is freaking us out. We need to back out just to, try and make sense of this. We ended up having a group of 17 that went through the True North blueprint, really defining and digging into their core values, understanding not just what they were, but why they were important and how to live in alignment with that, with radical consistency, right? Understanding what their great, character strengths were, their purpose and intrinsic motive. So went through all that. What was interesting, the timing, obviously, I had no idea that we were about to experience a worldwide pandemic, but everybody that finished the program thrived throughout the pandemic, right? It was like somehow exactly what they needed because they felt so secure in their foundation and making decisions and being able to transcend and rise up through the uncertainty, unprecedented amount of uncertainty. I think it was a term that we heard a lot. And they were able to really grow and thrive in the midst of that. So I say all that because from there, I didn't know exactly how I was going to take this course that I had and try and turn that into a business. But I knew because of the results that we got, that I had to figure out how to help more people go through this, how to get. So ended up bringing through my church about 150 people through a kind of a little bit of a modified version of that. And I think since then, we've had about 700 people go through, that course. So that's been remarkable. And, the testimonies and the experience has been absolutely some of the most fulfilling and gratifying work I've ever done. However, in the last year, I would say, I've realized as people have, gotten through the material and it's been a couple of years, like life doesn't stop happening, right? You still experience setbacks, rejection, failure, adversity, and all kinds of those things. And I felt like there was a need to equip people. They knew their true north, but how could they have the resilience, right? I feel like too, the referrals that I've been getting from people, there's a fragility, right? I think people are just really maxed out. They're burnt out. I think the effects of the pandemic psychologically, you have a lot of people that lost a sense of autonomy, right? And so they felt really stuck. They lost their motivation. They lost their direction. So I built a radical resilience, a concept of resilience that I was really into. And at one point was going to write my dissertation in grad school. But so really been leaning on this radical resilience material, which I hope we get a chance to chat a little bit about today. Because I think resilience is what our country needs in spades right now. I think there's an absence of it. I think there's a need for people to not just have a vague sense of, yes, I can be tough, but like, how can they give a very specific language and understanding of the variables in life that bring out their most resilient response? Were they able to rise above uncertainty and really, have you heard the term antifragile?
Yes, to Nassim Taleb.
Yeah, great concept. That book, I don't know if you read it.
I did.
A little tough to get through, but love the concept.
I love what Nassim writes. I've read a whole bunch of his books. I have no trouble. The only books of his that I have trouble getting through are his math books. So he's actually an options trader. And if you've ever looked at one of his options trading books, it's like, this is just way too advanced math for me.
He is clearly, I don't throw this word lightly. I think he's a genius, right? A very, very smart individual. When we talk about radical resilience, it aligns very much with his concept of anti-fragility, right? Just really not just how do you persevere and get through things, but how does adversity actually make you stronger? And knowing very specifically how, like, the way it makes you stronger, and in what ways? Like, is it by strengthening your sense of purpose, strengthening your compassion, whatever those things are. So in the book, Nassim talks about antifragile. So normally if you take something that's fragile and you drop it, it will break. Yeah.
Antifragile, when you take something and you drop it, it actually strengthens. And that is the whole concept of antifragile. It's not just, it's that you actually do better through adversity. And I don't think that's what most people do. So speaking of fragility, are you noticing, because I know this is the concept that comes up a lot, the younger generation being much more, we'll call it fragile?
Yeah. And in fact, I don't do a ton of work with kind of teens and young adults. That used to be an area I specialized in, but I have some connections with different colleges that will sometimes send referrals to me. And I would say in this past year, I have seen more referrals than all of my years combined of practice, almost 20 years, of students who went away to college, right? These were pandemic kids that graduated or had a missed year of really social development. They go down to school, they put all the effort, right? Get all the grades to get into a great school. And they went down there and they just were so far out of their comfort zone, and they didn't have the resilience or the anti-fragility, right? To be able to kind of bounce back and, get stronger, and their world just started to collapse on them, and they ended up having to take a medical leave. And so that's where I got reached out to. And so where I was tasked to help them then develop a very clear resilience plan so that they could enter back into school, except this time be able to do it and be successful and thrive. And we've seen about 10 of those students now go back. I'd say 9 of them are crushing it, right? They're doing great. One of them ended up having to take another year of leave, but I've never seen so many of these referrals. And talking to colleagues, I'm hearing similar things from my colleagues, that there is just an excessive amount of we call it fragility, but these kids are struggling.
Do we know what the underlying cause is?
I don't remember if we talked about this last time, but there was a really interesting study that was looking at the best predictor of happiness. And it was like sustainable long-term happiness, not just fleeting moments. And so they're looking at internal characteristics or variables, like, is it optimism, right? That tends to create or be the best predictor of happiness. Is it social skills? And to the researcher's surprise, autonomy was the best predictor of consistent happiness. That's a word that I feel like sometimes needs a little clarification on what it means, because it gets used in ways that I don't think represents true autonomy. I actually found a great definition. I think it was the Merriam Online Dictionary. And it said autonomy is a self-governed choice with moral agency. And it really requires both ends of that to be true autonomy, right? There's a lot of people that will tell me that one of their top values is freedom or autonomy, but the way that they express it is in a very reactionary, like, you can't tell me what to do type of a way, right? That's not autonomy. Autonomy is more like Viktor Frankl, right? Being able to make good choices, choose your attitude, and choose to do the right thing, even when, right, in the face of significant adversity. When you have that, you have a freedom that cannot be taken from you. I mean, I know Viktor Frankl's experience is quite extreme, being in 5 Nazi concentration camps. But I love he's got several quotes in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. I think one of them, paraphrased, is that he realized, that the one freedom, the ultimate freedom that they could not take from him was his ability to choose his attitude. And if you give that up, right, then essentially, so long way of bringing this back home on the college students, right? I think there was so many things that were out of their control, things that they didn't, certainly choose and didn't want to choose. And when we start to feel an absence of autonomy and it feels like there's nothing you can do about it, you develop a concept known as learned helplessness. And that is the precursor to depression, right? It will create a sensation of feeling stuck that really is pretty awful. And I'm seeing that on such a massive scale with that age and that population. You throw that in with social media and social comparison, right? And those things, and it's really a formula for a lot of suffering.
That it is. And Yeah, I don't know how it'll get fixed.
Yeah.
Well, and I think part of that, though, I mean, the schools aren't doing it. The schools don't teach resilience. The schools don't even teach agency at all. They don't teach you how to figure out what is your true north. They don't do any of those things. If anything, they're teaching you to follow their rules, and the outcomes, as we have all learned, just aren't what they said they would be. And I think more and more people are waking up to that, especially with the ridiculous cost of college and everything else going on. In any case, we're here to talk about radical resilience. What does radical resilience mean?
Yeah. Well, again, the term radical, I feel like is something that's been kind of hijacked. And the definition of it, most people associate that term with the concept of just being extreme, right? And it's often been used specifically to describe extreme political ideology. But if you look at the word radical in its Latin root, it means to get to the origin or the root of. It means like the fundamental essence of something. So to be radically resilient means that you at your very core, right, are resilient, that it comes out of your identity. That's where I think the true north concept paired with resilience is the most powerful combination that I have ever experienced or used, right, with clients, because they first define those things that point true north, that remain stable and constant, right? Their core values, understanding their sense of purpose, understanding a clear direction that when they're focused on it, like it creates a virtuous upward cycle, right? The more that they operate in that space, the stronger and more motivated they feel. You can perform at your very highest. And intrinsic motivation is like clean fuel, right? The more you tap into it, like it doesn't burn you out. You can perform at extreme levels and still feel completely energized at the end of the day. So then you pair that with the resilience with very specific strategies, right? That is comprehensive, preventative strategies. So you're not having to rely on resilience as much. Understanding short, immediate interventions that you can apply that give you immediate results, and what are the long-term things that you do to create resilience around stress mindset, exercise, sleep, things like that. So it's radical because it is comprehensive, because it is a fundamental aspect, right? There is no one-size-fits-all program in the way that we do it. And I've seen probably 15 to 20 different resilience programs, and a lot of it is one size, right? Like you do mindfulness, you do things that I think are good, but not everybody responds to that, right? I've worked with organizations that the term mindfulness will completely turn them off, right? And they will immediately not get the benefit out of that. I actually had somebody that is in the Border Patrol that was listening to an interview I did with a common friend, Blake Brewer. And he reached out to me and said that the Border Patrol invested in a resilience training. I'm pretty sure it's Marty Seligman out of the University of Pennsylvania, the positive psychology founder. He sold a massive resilience training program to the Pentagon and the military. But he said, one, that I think they had to take a 12-week course and try and finish it 2 weeks. So already that was not set up to be successful. But he said he could see of all the boredom that he's in El Paso. That's like the front lines, right? Of they're completely overworked. And he said you can see the difference between the people that finished the training and didn't. He said it's like remarkable. You can physically see the difference. And he said, but there were things that he felt like were missing in that program that just didn't apply to a lot of the people he worked with, that he felt like in listening to. And since we've had conversations and he's starting to go through my challenge, that I think is much more customizable, right? It's just true to who you are instead of saying, we're going to try and force you to fit this model. If that makes sense.
It does. And I kind of wanted to ask you about True North, because I think in the past, everyone thought True North was a fixed direction, right? Like this is the True North. But I think what you're saying is True North is your defined True North, not society or someone else's defined True North.
Excellent distinction. It's fun. Originally, did you know there's a difference between True North and magnetic north?
Yeah, there's a couple of degrees off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I say this, right? I know if you're hiking, right, you got a compass. Obviously, magnetic north is reliable. But what I think is interesting, the distinction is magnetic north is constantly reading the electromagnetic field of the environment. I feel like a lot of people live that way, but probably in more extreme terms where they're reacting to who does my environment expect me to be, and then their direction is based off of that. What I like about True North is it is a set location, but what True North means for me and what it might mean for you and what it might mean for someone else could be really quite different. And oftentimes is, right? Because it brings in that uniqueness, that individuality. But figuring that out, there's probably a handful of things in your life that will remain really stable for a very long period of time. And building your decision-making, your goals, your relationships off of those things will provide a security and a strength. And the more you repeat that, right, you will find a power and a force, right, that you can tap into. It's phenomenal.
And I just wanted to make that distinction because I think it was important for people to understand that.
Absolutely.
One of the things that we kind of chatted about, I think when you think of resilience and so forth and the ability to go through difficult times, I think most people probably white knuckle it, right?
Yeah.
How does that fit into the way that you talk about it?
I think for a lot of people, there's a lot of great stories of tops. And we all love, right, the story, the Rocky story. And I think he's even got the videos about you get knocked down 7 times, you get up, 8. And we love those stories of toughness and perseverance and resilience. And I know a lot of people, I'd say even myself going through grad school, right? I'm not a quitter. I've never been a quitter. That doesn't mean, though, that I don't make a lot of self-destructive decisions on the pathway to try and reach my goals, right? So I ended up having to take an extra year of grad school because my dissertation, I didn't like the topic that I chose. I didn't enjoy writing it. I knew I would never quit. Of course, I was going to finish it, but I didn't have a specific resilience strategy that was true to who I was. And so because my resilience, kind of concept was very vague, I was white knuckling it, right? I was just trying to use pure force of willpower to get myself to do it. And willpower is strong, but it has limitations, right? It's like kind of a gas tank. And once you kind of burn through it, there's nothing left. I think a much better strategy is to develop, really clear, specific language to say, I know the things, right? I know the people, and I know specifically what roles that they fill in my life that help me to tap into resilience, right? Here's my support network. I know, my values, that when I'm focused on making decisions at those, I feel like I'd run through a brick wall, right? I feel more focused. I feel like a lot of times I suffer from what I call existential ADD, right? Where, I start watching the news for a few minutes, I get on social media, and all of a sudden my brain is flooded with things that really aren't essential to me. I'm worried about, not going on enough vacations because my neighbor's going on his 7th one of the year, right? And my head is clouded with all kinds of really nonsense. So the more I'm able to keep coming back to my values, I feel so much more resilient, right? So the more that I can really dial in these things that are really specific to who I am, my ability to bounce back quicker so I can get back into True North kind of mindset and purpose is so much more efficient and effective.
What percentage of people know their True North?
Oh, man, I would say a very small percentage. I'll be generous and say 5%.
Why is that?
I think you covered it a little bit earlier when we were talking about the education system. I mean, not to certainly blame it all on the education system, but we're just not raised, right? Like in school, conformity is something that's valued. And I get it. As a teacher, they don't really have the ability to help 30 different students in a classroom, right? To kind of find their true north and to set up plans, even though, schools are supposed to have IEPs. I've dealt with schools enough to know that they abhor, right? They do not like IEPs. They certainly struggle to be able to actually implement them. And for those who don't know, an IEP is an individualized education plan, right? So everybody's supposed to have a plan set up to help them thrive in school. But that is often not the case. If you deviate, right, from the norm, if you have ADHD, you got a, learning disability. Your learning style is not the typical, auditory or visual learning style, then you often are seen as a problem child. So I 100% wish, and we are having a few colleges right now that are looking to implement our True North Radical Resilience program. So I hope we can get some traction there. But schools would be so wise even in high school, even earlier, right? To start to teach kids how to start to define their core values. And not just that, but how can they actually start to make daily decisions that affirm and align those? The research on that would show like self-worth, resilience. There was a fascinating study out of Stanford where they looked at college students that were first-generation college students, came from poor families. That demographic is the least likely to graduate by far. And usually when they experience hardship and external things that they can't control happen, they drop out of school and they often get a job and just realize that education path isn't for them. So they're looking to try and say, how can we stop this trend? One of the things they did that was so simple is they helped these kids, these young adults, to define their core values. And then they just wrote and journaled for a few minutes every day. This is what it means to me. And this is one decision I'm going to make that affirms and aligns with my values. Within a couple of weeks, their internal narrative completely shifted. And they developed it. They called it a narrative of self-adequacy. That sounds, who wants to be self-adequate, right? But really it was self-efficacy, right? They believed they could overcome their external circumstances. And because they believed that, they started leaning into more challenges. And I want to say the graduation rates flipped. It went from like 15% to like 60% as a byproduct of this simple intervention. Like, how hard would that be to help, an entire generation of kids to start to do things like this? And the effects on it would be massive.
They would. We covered this back in episode 254 with Greg and Beth Langston, and that's what they do. They work with high school kids to help them figure out their true north, plan it out, and then they go back and present to their parents and saying, this is what I plan on doing. This is my forward path before they get to college, because that might not even be part of the equation, depending on where they're going. And then also making sure they're picking the right direction when they go into their major, instead of what happens with so many people. They get a major and then they go do something else.
Yeah. Well, I love them. Glad to hear. I don't know how many schools they've gotten into, but I hope they're able to get into as many schools as possible, because it's desperately needed. I think the other thing that's difficult, as young kids, really our currency for life is attention, right? It's the most important thing. The worst we can do to a kid is to ignore them. And so kids get very good at figuring out what will get them attention, right? Is it being a people pleaser? Is it being, the family comedian? Is it being a bad child, right? Because negative attention is better than no attention. And so, and oftentimes whatever that thing is, right, that they get known for becomes a part of who they are, becomes a part of an ongoing pattern. And so we're, again, not necessarily, it's tough with kids, right? I got a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old. So helping them to really be able to flex their uniqueness and individuality when sometimes we just need them, right, to listen and do what we're saying. So I acknowledge that it can be challenging, but I think there's a lot of parents, right? If you're not equipped, if you have not defined your true north as a parent, you're not going to be equipped to help your kids define, right? So it's just, I think, a legacy that just gets passed on then from generation to generation.
Today's episode is sponsored by Profit Answer Man Podcast. Did you know that most small business owners hate looking at their financials? It's one reason they may struggle with business success. The Profit Answer Man podcast helps them ensure they are profitable and can pay their employees and weather the storms we all have to face. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. And it kind of where we usually start this podcast, which is on understanding money. And if the parents don't understand money, the kids are going to have to go figure it out somewhere else. If they're lucky, they get a lesson. If not, then the money struggles constantly go on. You kind of touched on this when you were talking in some of your answers, but can you be too resilient?
Yeah. love that question because it seems like, I think, right? Like, no, resilience is something where I think resilience can go wrong is when there's a absence of self-awareness. I think specifically of a client that I was working with last year who co-founded a huge firm. And in the process of doing that, he was a grinder. He would put in 16 to 18 hour days, right? Building that practice up and getting new clients. And he loved the pursuit of that, right? The building of it, it energized him. But over the years, right, I think he was very externally motivated. And if you're externally motivated, there's always a shelf life for that, right? Eventually, there's kind of diminishing returns. Getting more money kind of loses some of its appeal at a certain point for a lot of people. You need something more to sustain. So for him, he didn't, right? He just stubbornly kept trying to force himself into the same role over and over again, even though he hated now going to work, right? His work performance was significantly suffering. His health was starting to decline, right? His marriage he just was very unhappy overall. And yet he stubbornly, right? What he thought he was being noble and resilient and trying to force himself to, do those 16 to 18 hour days, doing work that he no longer found fulfilling. We just did a flow state evaluation, one of a part of our radical resilience program, right? Because flow state is about as resilient as you can get. And we realized that, we put him in a role where he was intrinsically motivated. He loved mentoring, the new generation of employees. He loved building relationships and creating new pipelines of sales. We put him in that role and he'd figured at this point, he was in his 60s, right? That he just cognitively, he just didn't have it. He probably needed to, start to think about retirement. Even though as soon as we got him in the right role, and then he was able to be resilient, doing things that he actually was passionate about. That guy's in his prime, right? He's got another 15 years of being able to operate at an extremely high level. And now he's putting in, shorter days because, it's not particularly healthy to put in 16-hour days for the most part. But he's coming home from the office feeling completely energized, which allows him then to have time and bandwidth to go exercise and to take his wife out on a date. So it was amazing within a short period of time, right? When his resilience was now placed with some self-awareness to his true north, right? Now we see his partner called me up, 3 weeks after we did the flow state evaluation and helped shift his role in that. And he's like, he ended up going through the program. He's like, I don't know what you did, but like, it's remarkable. He's walking into the office whistling. Before he came in and he looked miserable. He'd go in, he'd shut his door, he didn't talk to anyone, right? His wife and he are thriving. So it's amazing when resilience is added with just a bit of true north self-awareness, that you see resilience is really appropriated, I think, in very healthy ways. But when people lack self-awareness and they're just white knuckling it, you can be tough and persevere, but you're just heading in the wrong direction. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And I think too often than not, people either don't have the agency to pick where they want to spend their time, or too often they're shoved into roles that don't bring them energy, or sometimes people just aren't even aware. They haven't done the self-assessment to say, I love this, I hate this, and to have the courage and the knowledge that they can say no. Like, you just have to learn to say, no, I'm not doing that, and figure out how to either, if it's something that needs to be done, put somebody else into that role to do it, or figure out how to get by without doing that. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Now, there are some things you can't do that with. You talked about working out. I can't pay somebody to work out for me, right? But that doesn't mean I can't find a workout that I enjoy doing. And so it's just that little shift of how you look at things, and you have to figure it out for you. There's no one's going to give. This is the problem. Everyone wants a cookbook or an answer. There is no answer. The answer is you have to figure out you.
Yep. That's what I love. Our program is a framework, right? All it is a series of exercises that we know have proven results. But it's not about, us telling you who you are. It's about, hey, no, you got to do the work and you got to answer these questions. And yes, for some people, like the flow state exercise, surprisingly, is an extremely frustrating exercise for a lot of people because we're not trained, right? You think about what are the tasks and responsibilities that I really enjoy doing. I'm both good at, but also that energize me, right? What are the types of interactions and relationships I want to be creating and engaging in? And what is the mindset, right? That when I think about that role through this lens, it feels radically purposeful, right? I feel like I'm having, and it's amazing when you're able to answer those questions. You created literally a flow state manual for yourself in your own language, but people find it extremely frustrating, right? Because as they're going through it, they just don't have the language and they have to dig deep. Always, every single time someone finishes it, they are so grateful they did. But you have to, there's no consistent success without being able to build some frustration tolerance. Right? The most successful, consistently people are very good at being able to tolerate discomfort and frustration and still be able to move forward towards a goal, even in the face of that discomfort and frustration. That's why I think resilience is so important.
It's always going to be there.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't do away with it. You can choose how you react to it, but you can't eliminate it. And I think that's one of the things I'm struggling with currently. It's like, okay, I enjoy doing these things. However, their time sucks. And even though I enjoy them, they're not the most productive use of my time. So how do I then rearrange my schedule to say, okay, first do XYZ that you enjoy, which is bringing you the results you need, and then go fill it in with the low value things that you enjoy doing.
Yeah.
And that's more at work. That's not in my personal life. In my personal life, I make sure that there's the boundary so that I have time for both. But there are parts of my job that I know a lot of business owners don't like that I actually enjoy. And so that's why I think it's been a struggle to let them go. So we'll figure it out little by little. And I think once you let them go, you realize, I didn't need to be doing that.
It's so well said. And I think, like you said, being able to say no to some things that you've experienced so much resistance from internally, right? So it takes so much energy to try and work through that. There's somebody else that loves doing that. Right? There's somebody, so when you let go of it, there's somebody that for them, that is what they're intrinsically motivated to do. And so it's amazing, right? So there's kind of a win-win potential there when you start to say no or set boundaries around things that just clearly deplete you.
Well, so it's funny because most business owners hate looking at their financials, like to the order of 95%. And that's what I love doing. So like my market is very big because everyone else hates it and I love it. And they're like, just tell me what I need to do. And I'm like, okay. And
I could fully see that. Yeah.
It worked out. I guess I got lucky, right? So one of the things you talked about before we hit record was a ratio. There was of how to thrive. Can you expound on that and let us know a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. The first time that I ever saw anything about a ratio that seems to be conducive or necessary to thrive was with in the marriage book, John Gottman, right? For probably the preeminent researcher on marriage and relationships out there at University of Washington. And he would bring couples into what he called his love lab, and he would do these interviews with them, right? For an hour and a half. And at the end of that, he could say with, I think, 95% accuracy, whether or not they were going to stay married or get divorced, right? And what he was looking for was not necessarily some of the things that we often associate with marital success, but it was very specifically a 6-to-1 ratio, right? Of positive to negative, very much like a bank account, right? Because we have a negativity bias that we tend to give more weight to the negative, we need a surplus, right, of positives. And when we have that, we feel secure, just like we would financially with a surplus, right? So we start to feel safe in our relationship, and that's conducive to growth, right? To being able to weather hard times because there is a surplus. And so that might look like a husband puts his hand out to hold his wife's hand and she reciprocates, right? She holds it. That is a deposit into their relationship account. A negative, a withdrawal might be a criticism, right? And that hurts, and it creates kind of a lack of attachment or kind of a pulling away from, right? So the more you have moments that add to and that create connection, those are deposits. But I've seen that same 6-to-1 ratio also show up in personal well-being and thriving, right? So in our own happiness, having that 6-to-1 ratio also is the key to thriving. And then I've seen, I think it was the Losada line, where someone did research looking at business culture, and it might have been 5-to-1, but it was, roughly the same ratio that is conducive. And he said 3-to-1 was necessary just to have a functioning culture, right? Something that wasn't actively undermining the business. But when you ramp it up to 5-to-1 or 6-to-1, then you start to see, right, just what that culture is capable of. You start to see people performing at their very best. You see what we see with the radical resilience, right? You see less turnover, less burnout, less need for medical leave. You start to see people operating in their flow state zone, right? And so all of a sudden, they love coming to work, and people are sacrificing for each other, right? And they're supporting each other. They get through hard times. We've read about resilient companies that when they went through an economic downturn, people would give their sick days to other people to help them, get through challenging times. You get CEOs that would forego, salary for a year. And so, that's when you really create resilience like that. It's phenomenal how the sum of the parts, like the way they come together, creates a culture that promotes thriving, where people absolutely do their very best work, and they love where they get a chance to do it at.
And so I guess we have to measure that and make sure that we're doing it. There's so many things 100%. To do.
So many. And I think the reason why that 6-to-1 ratio is fascinating to me, both as from a personal anecdote, I believe that the resilience is the key to being able to reach that, because inevitably you're going to have deposits, right? In any of those areas, or withdrawals, sorry. But my ability to respond to a withdrawal moment effectively is the key. So, sometimes marriage for me is the easiest example. But with my wife, we were recently on a car ride together, and it was going to be like a 45, 50-minute car ride. She said something that hurt my feelings, right? Criticism. I'm a sensitive guy. And I felt this internal, as she said that, well, now I'm going to go silent, and I'm going to just completely not talk to her for the rest of the car ride. And it felt like it was a natural law that I had to obey, right? Fortunately, because I've defined my true north as a husband, I knew that wasn't how I wanted to treat her. And so I at least had the mindfulness in the moment to be like, I don't think I want to do this. And so, within a very quick period of time, I was able to rebound from that thought and that kind of the feeling that I wanted to act on, and was able to put my hand out, and realize, because what happens? So I give her the cold treatment, right? We go to this event. I put on a fake smile and, go out there. But internally, I'm feeling like a fraud, because I know I just treated my wife terribly, right? We get back in the car afterwards, and the fight resumes. And we take one withdrawal and we turn it into 15, right? And now I've got to create 90 deposits to try and make up for that. As opposed to in this one, I was able to put my hand out, right, to hold my wife's hand. And as she went to go hold it, I actually did one of those psych moves, right? I kind of pulled it away, and she looked at me like, and fortunately, she saw the humor in it. We started laughing. It broke the ice. And then we were able to have a really lovely car ride, right? And that, my reaction to that moment turned into a deposit, and overall has created, a tapestry in our relationship that is conducive to us, being in a really secure, growing, thriving place. But to be honest, there's many times, right, where I actually stuck. I knew I was heading in the wrong direction with the silent treatment, but then I doubled down on it. And then just to, because this is going so well, why don't I triple down on it, right? And I think there's a lot of people out there that can probably relate to that sense of sometimes knowing that they're making a bad reaction to something, but because they don't have the resilience dialed in so specifically, right, they don't have the techniques and strategies to know how to quickly rebound. So they're able to take a withdrawal moment and turn it into a deposit.
And again, these are all skills that need to be learned, and they're not skills that are generally taught.
Yes.
I'm wondering, and I don't know if you have the historical, were these skills that were taught in the past and just modern society has gotten us away from this? Because if you think about going to live with tribes, if you lived in a small tribe or in a small family unit, so to speak, in a small town, was that more the case that people would at least teach or comment? Or am I just thinking way out of the box?
No, that's a fascinating question. And I wish I could give more historical, like kind of evidence or anecdotes on that. But I do, this is, there's a saying out there that tough times create great people, great people create good times or easy times, right? Easy times create weak people create tough times, right? And creates that cycle. And so I do think that, there are former generations. I just think we're more resilient. I think there are a lot of the things that we teach in this program are timeless principles, right? Things that have been taught, principles from the Bible, right? Principles from, Stoic philosophy, things like that, that I don't know without having lived in that, if people actually practice those things or if they were truths that people ignored back then too. I think my own field sometimes is really at times responsible, right? I think this notion, like in California, we had the self-esteem movement, right, in schools, where the participation trophy, right, we're just going to tell everyone that they're amazing and they're winners regardless of their actual effort. And it seemed like a good idea, right? The more you tell people that they're wonderful, they're going to feel great, and you go out, they're going to actualize their potential and thrive. Well, that actual result showed, right, that when you tell people something that they know they didn't earn, one, the adults lost credibility, so they stopped trusting them. Two, they realized it didn't matter what their effort was. They were going to get rewarded regardless, which actually shut down their motivation. They became apathetic and depressed. And then they also felt entitled to rewards. Like, this is the worst combination that you can imagine. So you have an entire generation, right, of these students out there where a meritocracy, I think something that probably more consistent with previous generations, is actually a good model, right? That you get rewarded based off of your effort. And so, and we feel good when we know we've put in effort. That's like where the whole sense of autonomy comes from, right? I'm going to say, I think God put it in us that when we freely choose to do the right thing, it leads to happiness.
I think part of it, and it's, watching my kids grow up and seeing when kids are still young, they haven't experienced parts of life. And if they haven't experienced them, it's hard to learn those lessons. But when you live in close families and now your kids are 27 and 25, for example, and they're married, but you're around them all the time, and they have kids, all of a sudden you get the wisdom of different generations coming through and saying, hey, pulling the guy aside, pulling the woman aside. And to be honest, when I grew up, if you did something wrong, the whole neighborhood would yell at you. So there was more of that, I think, cohesiveness or difference that today doesn't exist at all. And it comes back to what you said. It's the cycle, right? We got through that cycle. And, this is probably, even the last generation struggled to get ahead of their parents. This one, it's going to be a much, much bigger struggle. And so that's what comes around until things go back through this cycle. And that's what it is. It's just a cycle. Understand where you are in the cycle. And just because the cycle is there doesn't mean you have to follow it.
That's right.
You get to choose what you want to do and how you want to go through. And you can pick a better path if you choose to. Yeah.
One of the things that we teach, right? There's a concept known as inner locus of control in the program that, when you experience stress and adversity, oftentimes there's a lot that you have no control over. But the more you fixate and focus on those things, it robs you of your resilience, right? So when you're thinking about, someone recently that pulled out of a deal in a very unethical way, right? And I was really upset, frustrated, and hurt. It was a friend. And the more I kept thinking about what they did and how wrong it was, right? I ended up, I just physically was in a terrible place, mentally was in a bad place, maybe want to avoid responsibilities at work. But the two things that I feel like you can always control, right, is the ability to choose your attitude, as Viktor Frankl wonderfully pointed out, and how you respond to the moment. The crazy thing is there's tremendous power in those two things, right? If you just are able to consistently keep being able to focus, we deal with corporations. So we have a checklist, right? A resilience checklist that goes usually at each employee's kind of desk or where they work. So that way they're not having to keep it up front of mind. It's right there so they can access it in real time. But the more they're able to keep coming back to the inner locus of control, that's where your agency exists, right? That's where autonomy, and you light up your motivations in their brain, right? When you're focused on, well, I could take this small action that helps me to point back true north, your brain loves that. Your brain loves when it has something it can actually take action on that feels, achievable and feels important. That's how you absolutely light up. And then you just create kind of a virtuous cycle as opposed to those vicious cycles, right? That tend to really lead to some really bad decisions. But that's one of the things we're trying to work on with my kids. My son, we were at the park the other day, and there's this climbing wall. It's about 10 feet high. There's one that has a little bit of an incline, and then there's one that's literally straight up. And the one that's straight up has always kind of terrified him. He gets really nervous on there, and he just gets paralyzed. He freezes on there. And so, I'm trying to teach him, you can do this. But I helped him. I said, hey, first off, let's have a plan before you get on the wall, right? I want you to map out where you're going to put your feet beforehand so that when you get up there and the adrenaline and the fear starts to flood your brain, right? You can't problem solve in those moments. So problem solve in advance, know that you're prepared. And it's amazing. As he went up there, he remembered the steps that he was going to take and he climbed up the wall. He was shaking as he did it, right? He was still very, very nervous. But to see the joy on his face when he was at the top of that wall, right? And then he did it again and again and again. Like that's priceless, right? And that's just what we're doing with this radical resilience is we're just equipping people so that when they experience setbacks and adversity, they're not trying to figure it out on the fly. They don't have some really vague, ambiguous plan, but they have a very specific plan and they know they're prepared for the moment. So they're confident that they can not just get through it, but actually get stronger, antifragile style, right? That they will grow stronger and stronger through those moments.
And I think for kids, that's a big part of it is learning that learning isn't always easy, but understanding that when you put the effort in, you have a plan and you get the positive outcome that the next time you have to deal with a difficult situation, you can remember, oh, that's right. I did X. It was a little harder. I figured my way through. This is what it's going to be, and I can do it. And that just creates confidence. And then life is good.
I got to imagine with a profit first or with finances too, right? Teaching people not just to do the immediate gratification, right? Of whatever feels good or avoiding looking at things, right? But if you're willing to lean in with a plan, right? With kind of that you can actually start to see gains. You can start to build savings, right? Or you can start to add, this is your language, but it's amazing when you help people to start to recognize like you can be equipped to get through this and to actually start to create traction and to see that. And it's got to be incredibly rewarding when you see your clients, right? And they're able to go on the vacations or buy a property home or whatever those things are.
Yes. And I mean, it comes back to where we usually start the conversation here is understanding people's money scripts, where they started, and helping them to essentially overcome that and figure it out for themselves and doing that. So, yeah, it just takes a while. But, and it's the same thing as your kid it's the same principle as your kid learning to climb up the wall. It's just something new. And so again, it comes back to school because we were told math is hard. So they don't want to look at their finances. Okay. Math is not hard. Somebody told you that and it's not true. And honestly, it's funny because most of what we do is third grade math. You don't even have to be smarter than a fifth grader. So, so be it.
I'd love to change even some of the terminology, right? I mean, this is certainly overly ambitious. We use hard work and hard work. Trust me, I love, having a hard work mentality. What if we change the language? What if it was great work, right? Or something, because I just do think sometimes the meaning of words matter and the kids often, they want to avoid, right? It's hard. It's a struggle. And so we've tried doing that at home. Hasn't fully taken. But, and math is particularly like my daughter literally could read all day. Like she's read 2 books already today. But getting them to have the ability, the resilience, right, to recognize, yes, this is uncomfortable, but the feeling of achievement and satisfaction that comes as a result of pushing through, right, is really phenomenal.
That it is. Is there anything we should have talked about that we didn't get a chance to?
I feel like we covered a good amount of ground. I think just the corporate, I think we've certainly talked about that. That's where we're, as I thought about where could we really bring this material to have the greatest impact, I'm got a bunch of people, a group that I work with sometimes that are HR executives. And I've been hearing feedback from them that what they're seeing in the workforce is just a lack of motivation, a lack of the ability to self-initiate, right? They were seeing a lack of resilience. And really, ultimately, when I broke it down, that's what it was. And so I realized that if we could help bring this, and it stops from the top down, right? We start with the CEOs and the COO, and then we help to bring that to the executives, and then we implement it. I believe the trickle down effect. And what's beautiful is that when you teach the resilience principles and the employees and the executives start to apply it and they see the benefits, the same things that work for them in the office are the same things at home, that if they can apply these same principles, all of a sudden their marriages get better, right? Their health starts getting better. And that has been the most rewarding thing, right? To get the feedback on that from the CEOs, and the testimonies and things like that have just been so gratifying.
And those things kind of flow to everything. We notice that in the same thing. When you do well in one area, it overflows into other areas, and it all tends to come together. If people would like to learn more about you, your program, where should they go?
Best place to go is to go to my website. That's ag-thrive.com. And on there, you can certainly read about our Radical Resilience Corporate Program. We have a challenge on there that we'd love. It's $97. We try to price it at a point, right, where people would have some commitment to it, but it didn't seem to be prohibitive. But if anybody happens to be listening to this and there's I could really use this, and the $97 is something just reach out to Rocky, reach out to me, I'll give you a code, right? I want to get as many people, just like we've seen over 700 people go through the True North program. Honestly, I want to get 1 million people through this Radical Resilience program. So I am working hard every day, right, to see the numbers get through, because I feel like the timing on this is so critical. The Harvard Business Review, this came out just a couple of years ago, that they identified resilience as the must-have skill set for the modern workforce. And then they said in COVID, right, the companies that invested in resilience training, that they clearly fared better than those that didn't, and many of them emerged as big winners. But that many companies, right, once the COVID kind of crisis settled down, that they stopped investing. And they said that is a big mistake, that having a clearly defined resilience strategy for your company is arguably the greatest strategic advantage that you could have as a company. So I want to say thank you to Harvard Business Review for doing some of that research. And we've seen that companies that invested in resilience training see a 400% ROI. For every dollar they invest in resilience training, they've seen a $4 return on that, which is pretty incredible.
That is an incredible return, and we definitely like that.
Figured it speaks every language there.
It's my language. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, Rocky, I love having these conversations. I know even when the microphone gets turned off, we've had conversations, and it's really kind of the same thing. And so I just really appreciate your commitment to not just helping people with their money mindset, but you are so intentional, and it's something I've really come to respect and appreciate about you.
Oh, thank you. Just remember, embracing resilience is a lifelong journey, and it's never too late to start. We will always face adversity. It's how we choose to react that makes all the difference in our lives. Being anti-fragile is truly a superpower, and it's in our control if we believe it can be. Is life going to be perfect? No, but it can be better. By the way, if you have not read the book Antifragile from Nassim Taleb, I highly recommend it. So, what changes can you make based on the conversation today? And what can you do to become more resilient and help those around you to do so as well? By the way, who do you know who would benefit from listening to this episode of Richer Soul? I'd really appreciate it if you'd share it with them, or share it on social media or wherever you share these types of podcasts. It's a great way to share the love. Next week, we've got on Eileen Smith to talk about mastering the inner game, living with ease and vitality. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.